Welcome, everyone. We have CJ Llewelyn, who is the author of Chakras and the Vagus Nerve and a licensed counselor, trauma therapist. She has this unique ability to connect the chakras, ancient wisdom, with modern neuroscience, modern understanding of the vagus nerve. And I think this is really useful for you if you're dealing with pelvic floor issues, urinary issues, sexual issues. And we are really excited, CJ, for you to be here. And
Michael, thank
yeah,
you.
I, I want to jump straight in. I know this isn't very typical for us to go straight to questions.
I love it. No,
Yeah.
absolutely go.
What I wanted to ask you first is how can one identify the cause of their pelvic floor root chakra imbalance? And why would it even be useful to consider the root chakra in their pelvic floor issues?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have to bring in a little bit of my trauma experience with this because you may run up against this as well. I have for years worked with people who are survivors of childhood abuse. Unfortunately, mostly sexual abuse. So what happens during that time, right, is we become very disconnected to, and you guys are probably coming up against a lot of this, people become very disconnected to that portion of their body. That portion of their body becomes dangerous to them. So they end up with a lot more dissociative qualities within the hip down. I work a lot with women and they report this a lot. They want to put on the weight, they want to disconnect from this portion of their body. Giving you a little bit of background as to polyvagal theory and how this applies to this. Within polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges's theory, you guys can look it up. His work is ubiquitous. It's cool. It's bringing all sorts of ways to approach our body and our mind and, quite frankly, our spirit. Anyway, I'm giving you a little long answer, but it's important. We have 3 branches of the vagus nerve that register safety within our body. We have the ventral vagal, which is up around the heart, the throat. Then we have a sympathetic branch. That's what we all know, right? That sympathetic branch is mobility for us. And then we have a dorsal branch. And, I'm not telling you anything you don't know in regards to the physiology and the biology of our body. But what happens when we are coming into working within our pelvic floor, right? And I've learned a lot actually from my PT readers and people who are having conversations with me who have this background. There's a lot of disconnection. There's a lot of closed off energy in that area, which we would call chakra energy. So what I see as our energy centers of our chakras are extensions of our vagus nerve. So if we have had trauma in that area, that's going to be shut off. The energy is going to be shut off. And some of the work that you guys are involved in is right, bringing them back into safety, bringing them literally back into balance, right, within this portion of their body. So that root chakra, which is the energy center of survival, of just being in balance with our physical world, our body as it connects to the earth, right? As it gets us moving, as we begin to feel safe and grounded, is very much integrated into that work that you're talking about.
No, thank you for that. That's very helpful. I know one thing that someone is thinking in their mind, like as they're listening, is I didn't have sexual trauma, and
Mhm.
yet my pelvic floor is very dysfunctional. It has a lot of pain. And what would you say to them if they didn't have that particular experience?
Well, and of course, with what your work is, it would be some history taking in that regard. And I think regardless, we become so disconnected through messages, right, in our body, whether they are messages of good enough, right? Are we good enough? Are we safe enough? And it doesn't have to necessarily be trauma. And as we get older, I mean, how many elderly people do we know in our lives who start not feeling comfortable with walking? Right? The balance of that. What happens is it's not typically what we would consider trauma or the worst parts of a traumatic experience. It just simply becomes a bit of a disconnect over time. Sometimes we carry ourselves in ways, and I know I'm telling you everything about it. I'm telling you what you already know, but I'm
This
applying
is
this to this.
definitely for the viewers, for everyone who's listening. Yeah.
Yeah. We start applying ourselves out into the world. We start seeing ourselves in ways that we start carrying ourselves physically. And of course, sometimes we just simply get disconnected. We get literally crooked. I just got back from my Pilates class. For me, that's one of the ways that I stay centered, stay balanced, right? Stay connected to my lower portion of my body. It's just interesting how we disconnect from that, depending upon how we see our world and how we see ourselves in that world, too.
That's a good point. I have a lot of clients who didn't necessarily have sexual trauma, but I would say they're very disconnected from their body and they're very much in their head. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of worrisome thoughts, there's a lot of future thinking, future pacing, and
Mhm.
less just being with the sensations of what's here right now. But
Right.
because I think there is a feeling of a lack of safety, maybe it's financial situations, maybe it's a relationship dynamic, maybe it's just not feeling like they have community or friends or some loving connection, which you talked about that, groundedness and that feeling of connection and safety. Which kind of leads me to the next question. You hear about, let's say you read material about the chakras and the statements of survival and safety seem to be often connected to the root chakra. For sacral, you'll hear things like pleasure, sensuality, relationships, etc. And just to the best of your knowledge, where did these statements come from? How do we know that survival and safety, as an example, are somehow connected to this region of our anatomy?
That's a really good question. And again, I kind of lean in the way I'm trained, or lean back into polyvagal theory, because the theory is that our vagus nerve, those three branches, right? Safety, mobility, and immobility, are how we connect to the world. Even now, right? I'm connecting through you to you through a little sympathetic, right? I'm on point. I'm in this chat with you. I want to make sure I get everything right. And I'm connecting to you through I can see your face. So I've got a little bit of connection through the screen that we're as we're talking. So I'm feeling safe. And so what happens over time is we end up getting that disconnection overall in our body. But if you think about some of the ways that movement pulls into that area, that chakra, and again, I would just reinforce how I see our chakras is it's the etheric energy that is already presented in our vagus nerve. So that vagus nerve, when we get down into those, of course, the vagus doesn't go all the way down, but it influences the nerves that connect to the reproductive areas, the nerves that connect to the lower branches of our digestive, you know, all the portions, all the things, right, down in that area. So when we start reconnecting to that, we can feel the energy in that. So that makes sense. What I saw as I was working somatically with, and it didn't have to be people who were processing trauma, they're just processing life events. I saw the messaging coming up and down in the system. So as we start to move in that area again, we can start feeling that portion of our body. So the chakras are simply an experience to be felt. And when you experience that energy, you start bringing in the sexual experience of this, right? The elimination experience of it, all that goes with that. And I learned this from you guys as I've been going along in my work. The 5 diaphragms that are in that region of our body? I had no idea there were 5 diaphragms in our pelvic floor. I think that's cool. But yeah, so I think that the yogis were onto something really early on. They just didn't have all the imaging and the access to the medical stuff where we can start to overlay that. And then it starts to make sense.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. I was wondering what you would advise someone to do to reconnect. You've talked about feeling the energy flow again and almost unblocking something that's not moving through in that part of the body. And many people are afraid to because it hurts to do so. They're like, I hear the word sexuality or I hear the word, embody your pelvic floor, but it legitimately flares up their symptoms and it makes it worse, at least initially. Do you have
Mhm.
any recommendations on something that someone could do?
No, I am no pun intended, I am rooted in EMDR work, which uses eye movement, the bilateral stimulation of the eyes to help process out traumas or anything that gets stored in our bodies that starts locking us down in our lives. And so I think along the terms of one side, the other side, the bilateral, right?
Mm.
And a lot of times I have clients who aren't ready to go there, but I tell them to walk, just walk. We have that bilateral movement built into us, right? We're supposed to be doing this. We're not necessarily supposed to be always in cars, trains, planes, and automobiles, right? We're supposed to be out walking. Back in the old days, we used to walk to the store. We used to walk to our neighbor's house. We used to walk in our community. So the gentle movement of walking gets us to a point where we don't have to think about the possibility that maybe this might hurt. And we just get moving. And then we get into that bilateral branch of the vagus nerve. We get into the bilateral movement that mimics REM sleep, right? Those ocular nerves that start moving back and forth, that send messages down into our nervous system, our central nervous system, and then the autonomic branch of our nervous system, which is the largest autonomic nerve, is the vagus nerve. And then I want to say they're off to the races. They don't have to race. They're off to just engaging. And then when we can start engaging in an everyday thing that gets us into a lovely back and forth movement, and we're not thinking, I have to do this exercise, right? We start developing somatic confidence. I just made that word up. I don't know if it's an actual term. I
It's
think
a
I might
good
have to
term.
write that one down.
It's a good
Is
one.
it? Is it a term? But they start developing some confidence somatically within their body. And that can be that first layer into being more curious. Because I continue to think that the Buddhists still have this right because they were the first ones, the Hindu practices of the chakras, and then the whole mindfulness practice, where we start being curious about our body and not judgmental. And that's hard to do. We have decades worth of judgment laid into us that we then lay into our body, and then it just reveals itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's extremely important to realize. To be able to just be with what is in the raw sensation with no labeling, no, this is good, this is bad, this has to change. All of that is a thought storm that you're going to clearly notice for a while. But if it just comes down to this is what is right here, right now, that's what is. And then we just move forward from there.
Mhm.
That sounds so simple, but it is very challenging because there's a huge amount of resistance to the fact that this is here right now. And the mind wants it to not be here. And it wants to make sure that in the future you'll feel healthy and make sure that you'll be able to play sports again and go date again or have a baby or like all the things you're afraid of that you won't be able to do based upon the current situation. Um,
Yeah, mind is so focused on outcome, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah. Anything that it can do mentally to try to not have the current experience. It thinks it can work its way out of this hole by thinking, which doesn't actually work.
Mhm.
I was curious about the sacral and the solar plexus chakras, who, if anyone's not familiar, those would be moving up a little bit higher into the body, the lower abdomen, the solar plexus there, around above the navel, actually. But in terms of these next chakras and next parts of the body or the etheric body system, how would they interplay or influence even an imbalance in the root region of the body from your perspective?
When you talk about anxiety, where do you usually feel it? Kind of put that little space out there for anybody listening, right? Where do we feel the anxiety? We're feeling that usually in our gut, usually within the solar plexus or a little bit down into the sacral. And when we talk about, like you were saying, focused on outcomes, worrying about the actual feel, the feel of the body, that somatic presence, right? And somewhere in our mind, we've made up our mind that we don't want to feel any of this because it's uncomfortable. And by the way, a little footnote here, when I start working with a new client, because all my established clients know this, I always point out anxiety is not an emotion. It is a neurobiological response, perhaps to what the mind thinks should happen, right? So when we can really look at it in that regard, right? Then we can start feeling a little bit more secure within this region of our upper digestive solar plexus region, like that the plexus in there that attaches to our I don't, well, I guess your listeners are very scientific, so we'll go here. Attaches to the HPA axis, right? Which is releasing cortisol when we're feeling threatened. Sometimes we're not threatened, but we feel it, right? So that's some of the burning sensation we can get in that solar plexus. That sends itself down into that sacral region because, of course, this whole sympathetic and dorsal vagal regions of our body are sending us signals, in this case of if we're having discomfort in this region, it's potentially, like you said, from the mind. It's potentially from focused on outcome. It's potentially from history that says, well, every time I have breathed into this portion of my stomach, this is not a safe portion. It doesn't feel good to me. When I'm working with clients who hold a lot of memories, usually some form of traumatic memory, but a lot of anxiety in that area. We titrate down into that. We don't stay there for long. Over time, the body, right, all those neuroception, that neuroception, that's a Dr. Porges term, but start shifting. All the receptors in there start making new meaning. So again, that solar plexus chakra, that sacral chakra down to the root chakra are all connected within the nerves within that area of the body as well. And it's just what you're doing. It's having them reestablish a connection in a way that feels safer.
Yeah, absolutely. I was curious about, your thoughts on something. I notice a lot of my clients are they're very driven, often ambitious. We call it the type T personality, type tension, meaning that they hold it a lot on the inside as well, kind of passive aggressive, very mental landscape. And often they lean towards production and progress and away from pleasure, because the mind is so attached to this grand future and improvement and always perfectionistic tendencies. And how do you think this lack of pleasure, this lack of presence with experiencing and enjoying life, how could that imbalance you and how could that kind of play into this as well?
So we have a negative bias that's built into our body. And that negative bias comes historically from our ancestors, right? Out on the plain, having to hunt, looking for the wild animals to kill to bring back to our village, our tribe, right? So our whole nervous system is based on looking over our shoulder, looking through the grass. Where's the movement? What's going to come up on me, right? When we are out there in the wild, we are not as protected as we believe we are in an industrial world. So that negative bias is naturally built into us. And it's important for us to know that because that's exactly what I think you're talking to. Now I'm a constantly recovering, I call it type A, want to go, got, focused on outcome. So I'm constantly having to reach for a different portion of my body, ways of thinking differently, but also with the understanding that we do have a natural tendency within our brain and in our vagus nerve to look for danger. And of course, that gets really layered on in our industrial world because the more we can accomplish, perhaps the less danger we feel, the more resources, the more money we have in the bank, the bigger house, the more community. Of course, this all goes to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We're going to get the food in the fridge. We're going to start getting the shelter. We're going to start getting the resources to build the shelter, status and community. And before you know it, that negative bias has just been layered on with all sorts of social expectations. And it's really good to understand what negative bias is to begin with, because it's built in for our survival. And when we can know the things that are coming up that are there naturally for us to keep us safe, then we can understand the root of potentially what we've built onto that. And that would be more cognitive ways of approaching how we think over time. Thinking is such a habit, but boy, it's sending signals all the way down our nervous system, representing, in the muscles, the fascia. I
The
just got
fascia, the
some.
face, the fascia.
I know. The fascia. There you go. I just got gutters on and I kept saying fascia and the guys kept saying fascia. So I didn't know there was a difference in pronouncing. I think it's probably been spelled the same. But all that messaging that's going through our bodies, that's, by the way, representing in these energy centers, right? It's just simply coming out. It's simply what we feel when somebody who's working on your energy is saying, well, your sacral chakra is closed. What they're really not understanding is that there may be aspects of ourselves that aren't feeling safe and are just representing out into the chakras.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Another factor I see is that many people don't feel like they have a safe, loving relationship in their life, especially in this day of chronic isolation and loneliness. And how do you think this plays into chronic illness? This feeling that you don't have really a close community around you or a close relationship.
Yeah, that's profound that you're observing that. By the way, is the root of polyvagal theory. It's always something and interesting to read about and understand, because the crux of polyvagal theory, which is how I kind of use that's my roots of having any kind of conversation around this, is exactly that. We are literally designed through our nervous system to connect as safety. And of course, we are also designed to get ourselves out of situations that are not safe and interpret. But that's huge. And I think that, I don't know what solving the actual social problem is. I think we can all kind of surmise what some of these, I'd have to be a sociologist to tell you exactly why. But I think as we know this, right, as we start knowing this in our body, we start feeling it, we can just make an effort to get out and connect in ways that feel good. And by the way, we can connect through animals. There's another loving nervous system in the room. We can I was making a joke of this. I was presenting at the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology this week. And I don't know if you can see behind me, but I've got a lot of plants. And I said, we can co-regulate. This is the co-regulation part, right? We're connecting through our nervous system with plants, with animals, anything that is safe, community. Seek out, have a conversation with someone if you're alone on the phone. Listening to someone else's voice is a familiar, kind, understanding voice is huge for our nervous system. But yes, it's absolutely. I don't know how to solve the social aspects of this. I would love to. But if we know that this is part of the pain that we feel in our system, right? Because when we are isolated, we don't know how to regulate ourselves well. We're going to feel that pain in the ways that people present to you, right?
Yeah. We're in an endless mirror of our own personal patterns that are not broken by another person, which is what I
Right.
notice happens often.
Yeah.
As we wrap up here, I wanted to ask about the chakra side because some people might be listening. Like, I mean, I've heard of them. I don't really know why understanding this energy medicine side matters, or I'm not even sure if I trust that they exist. How does it help, or why does it matter?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think that over time now, I've come from it from two angles because I have that trauma therapy background and that clinical approach to this, but I've also been doing energy work in the past as a Reiki master. Um, we can feel we can feel someone before they walk in the room, right? Sometimes what we're bringing into the room, people are feeling as well. So it's an energy that extends outside of our nervous system. Sometimes we enjoy standing next to one person and we absolutely cannot get we don't even want to get in the same room as another person. That is the felt sense that you want to call, if you want to call it chakras, right? We have multiple energy centers in our body. We can feel them all the time. We can feel when our pelvic area is feeling a little bit more safety, maybe a little bit more open. We may not identify it that way, and you don't have to. We can feel when we are safe and our solar plexus is calm because we can eat, we can socialize, we can have lunch with friends because we're feeling that connection. It is a felt sense. Chakras are the felt sense that we have on our body, in our skin, right? We can feel that in that the somatic organs of that, right? And we don't have to analyze them. We can just accept that there are certain aspects of our body that are going to have this experience. You can call it energy, the energetic experience, right? We haven't even given on time, we haven't gotten into any of the ventral vagal aspects, the safety aspects that come in around the heart. But when we are feeling safe, we feel the energy open in our heart. You can call it what you want, but the ancients refer to that as the chakra, the heart energy, the heart chakra. So it's a felt sense. And you don't have to even believe in any kind of Eastern approach to understand that we have this felt sense. And it aligns with what's inside of us, the messaging inside of us. It seems to reveal itself on the outside.
Yeah, very well said. I would think of it as this finer, more subtle awareness of outside the body. So outside
Yep.
the where the skin stops and the rest of reality continues. What is that interconnected web between you and I right now as we talk? Or
Mhm.
like you said, when you walk into a room and you can feel something that's not inside of the body, but somehow
Mhm.
still is experienced in your conscious awareness.
Yeah.
And perhaps the chakras are the components of our structure that are energetic. And energy or chi or ki or whatever we want to call it is that word for everything else that's connecting. It's all the same thing, but the interconnectedness. So, yeah, I think exactly. You don't have to call it a certain thing. You don't have to believe in a certain perspective, but everyone will notice it. Like it can't be
Mhm.
denied that we have this proprioceptive energetic ability outside of where our skin stops.
I love that term, proprioceptive energetic ability. Absolutely, because that proprioception is how we see our space around us, and it's through also energy. It's not just how long our fingers are and our legs. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you, CJ, for answering these questions. They're kind of tough questions. Not many people have answers. I really enjoyed your book, Chakras and the Vagus Nerve. I know you have another one I haven't read yet. But yeah, I highly recommend your books, and we'll link up your website so anyone can reach out and learn from you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been so enjoyable. I love it. Thank you, Michael.